I finally hit the end of my journey in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. We wrapped it up last night on a live stream, and it's been a truly amazing experience with over 400 hours in game, 15, 16 YouTube videos, over 100 shorts, and 20 hours of story live streamed directly with you, all of that getting over 500,000 views. But is Tears of the Kingdom a perfect game? And is it everything we expected it to be as a sequel to Breath of the Wild, already one of the best performing and well-reviewed games of all time? Naturally, this video is going to be longer than you're used to on my channel, and there is a bit of fluffing because I like talking about games in this level of detail. So there are chapters in the description if you're interested in a specific part of the review, but of course I'd encourage you to watch the full thing if you're interested in my full perspective on the game, from the overwhelmingly positive opinions to areas where I feel the game does fall flat. We arrive in a version of Hyrule that is very similar to Breath of the Wild, and yet has many differences, both in terms of the story and lore, but also the world itself. Once you break through the opening 30 to 40 minutes of the game in a very well thought out tutorial area, which is unapologetically difficult given the new mechanics and enemies, we find ourselves able to explore any and every corner of this kingdom in any way we want. You could literally head straight to the end game boss after completing the tutorial. That is how open this game is, or even travel to any familiar town and pretty much start up any quest. To some, this may be a little bit overwhelming, but because it's all familiar territory, thanks to Breath of the Wild, it works. You know where some of the key elements of the game are, you know roughly what to expect when you go to certain areas, and yet there are still secrets and surprises at every turn, such as the revamped stables that now offer a multitude of quests and distractions, rather than simply boarding your horses like they did in the last game. While I won't go into too much detail about specific areas, I feel like the concept of taking a world that was already huge and teeming with life and adventures, and then giving it another 20 layers of depth and exploration is a fantastic way to create a game that expands on what we already know and love, making the world feel new and vibrant and yet cozy and familiar. And then you have the completely new massive expansions to the game, the depths and the sky islands. I'll go into depth, see what I did there, about those in a little bit, but just know that they really do add a lick of paint to the game that makes it feel even further apart from Breath of the Wild in the best of ways. One of the main concerns for Tears of the Kingdom was, of course, the fact that so many people assumed it was just a glorified DLC. But a DLC would just add a few new characters or a new game plus, or perhaps a small little area within the already existing world like we've already seen from Breath of the Wild's actual DLC. It was great, but it wasn't game-changing. It was exactly what it said on the tin, an expansion. Tears of the Kingdom, despite keeping to a very similar visual style, never felt like an expansion. It felt independent. It felt like every nook and cranny of the world has been revamped, like a team of developers had mapped out every 5 to 10 meters of the game and said, how do we make this better? How do we take this game that is already legendary and level it up? So, for those hesitant to buy this game because of familiarity, or perhaps you just have certain expectations that you've seen through social media, don't worry. This is a new, beautiful, vast game with so much more to offer than its already remarkable predecessor. The graphics of Breath of the Wild are redefined a genre, with hundreds of other games taking note and implementing cel shading techniques to their game, which is the art style that Zelda is now accustomed to. Tears of the Kingdom continues with that tradition, keeping with the same techniques but pushing the hardware to its limits in terms of fidelity, saturation, render distance, and animations. It goes without saying that games on the Switch in recent years have been kind of handicapped by the console's hardware, and we're all aware of that, and we're mostly looking at you, Pokemon. There are elements of this presented throughout your time in Tears of the Kingdom. The depth of field mechanics can feel a little bit off, frames can drop in certain areas of the game, and if you're not playing on an OLED Switch, sometimes the game can feel a little bit dull in terms of vibrancy. But none of that retracts from the game. Sure, it'd be great to experience this game on the next Nintendo Switch, rumored to be coming out next year with a patch for Tears of the Kingdom, which I really hope is a reality. But there wasn't a single moment throughout my 400 hours where I felt the world was empty because they couldn't put stuff in because of a fear of performance. Nor were there any points in the game where I wasn't enamored by the beautiful scenery and environments, particularly in the towns and the interiors. It's also worth noting that throughout my 400 hours, despite the odd frame drops in certain areas, I have not experienced a single bug, a visual glitch, or a crash. And from a developing standpoint, that in 2023 is remarkable, particularly with the new physics and fuse abilities in the game. Speaking of which, single-handedly the most revolutionary thing introduced to Tears of the Kingdom were the new abilities and the game mechanics. Looking back at Breath of the Wild, the abilities there felt like nothing more than a beta, a test version of what we were eventually going to see in this game. Being able to chop down a tree and then fuse that tree to another tree and then pull out a fan and attach that to your tree stack and then attach a steering stick and magically have all of those parts turn into a fully functioning boat with no physics issues whatsoever, that is incredible. And of course we've seen elements of this for years in gaming, even games like Minecraft, you follow a similar pattern, you get some logs, you craft them into a boat, but in those games you pretty much always just make a brand new item. It's not your creation, you're just exchanging materials in the game for a new thing. Tears of the Kingdom creations are your creations. You choose how they work, what they do, where they go, how powerful they are, and this is the first game that I've ever played that I genuinely feel like I could puzzle solve my way out of any situation by simply using the objects around me. And that's before you even start talking about the hover bikes and the motorbikes and the sailing ships or the desert exploring devices that you can create, all of which can completely change the way that you experience the game and interact with the environment. And then even after all of those revolutionary techniques, you have a brand new one, which is the ability to fuse any item to your weapon and shield, which for the most part is incredible. Towards the end of the game, it can get a bit weird when you're using like bone proficiency armor to level up a specifically made bone club to get the highest amount of damage, and it does feel a bit odd, but that also kind of leads me into one of my biggest issues with the game, in that the Master Sword is kind of redundant. There is this beautiful, heart-wrenching story of how you get the sword, and I won't go into detail about it, but it's one of the best narratives I've ever seen in a Zelda game, and it completely changes your perspective on like literally everything. But then it gets overpowered by like a spiky ball fused to a stick, or a monster horn on some half-broken sword. Then you have the recharging issues with the Master Sword, and the fact that the laser ability thing is kind of completely useless. I still want to play with the Master Sword because of its legacy and because of the story and simply what it means to have it in a Zelda game. But the reality is you can make a better weapon than what should be the most powerful weapon in the game with ease. Then you have the other mechanics like Recall, Auto Build, and Ascend. Recall rewinds time for any device or object in the game, which introduces some very fun puzzle elements. Auto Build serves as a catalog of some of your coolest and most useful Zonai devices. It's a great feature, but I do wish there weren't like a cap of how many devices you can store. And then Ascend gives you the ability to pass through any ceiling, again presenting some really cool puzzle mechanics. But I found this particularly useful when I started my second playthrough of the game. I promised myself I wasn't going to use any Zonai devices because I wanted to have a better appreciation for the world. And then I started realizing how many spots in the game the developers deliberately put random little things that you can ascend into to make climbing mountains and things like that so much more accessible. The story of Tears of the Kingdom is very, very well written. It still feels like a story for a younger audience in some of the ways it explains things, but as a 28-year-old man, I can honestly say that it gave me such a gut punch on numerous occasions. The dragon tears in particular, they really broke me, and of course the final few cutscenes of the main story, it was just all brilliantly written and put together. Now, I will say that there were elements of the story that I did find rather tedious, and I think the majority of people will put this down to how I played the game rather than the game itself, although I do feel like the open world elements in the cutscenes could have been made a little bit more structured to help with the overarching story. Let me explain. So in my playthrough, one of the biggest things that caught my attention at first were the dragon tears, and I realized pretty early on, due to an actual main story mission that encouraged you to find them, that by going to these sites throughout the game you can unlock memories and stories and cutscenes. So I chose to do those first. A few hours went by and I found all of them and revealed the location of Princess Zelda, which is the main story narrative. Then, for every other main mission in the game, as you head to different regions and you collect your companions and you progress through the story, you constantly have sightings of Princess Zelda, and time after time there are questions. Who was she? Was she real? Was she fake? Where is the real one? And you do this time and time again despite knowing the answer to all of these questions. Then when you decide to take a break from the main story, there are entire side quests where you have to travel to every single corner of Hyrule, every single stable, to help people who think think they saw Zelda, and yet again you're constantly hit with the where is she, what is she doing thing when you already know everything. And this went on for like 100 hours of my playthrough. Bear in mind I was taking it slow, but I couldn't help feeling that if the Dragon Tears was somehow locked behind various other points in the story itself, I would have had a better experience in all of the other quests, because then the mystery would have still been alive for me. And bear in mind that the location for Princess Zelda isn't actually revealed in the main story until the penultimate mission, the one before you go and take on the big bad boss. I feel like I'm being somewhat cynical about the story itself, and I really don't want it to come across that way. The story and writing themselves are beautiful, the cutscenes are gorgeous, and the voice acting is the best we've ever had. I just feel like there needs to be some kind of safeguard in place to stop people from spoiling things for themselves, or at least have a sense of mystery remaining if you decide to complete the tiers early in the game like me. The music in Tears of the Kingdom is perfect. There's no questioning that, and I don't have any complaints here whatsoever. If anything at all, I wish the music had been more prominent in the overworld, as it's so good. I would have loved some kind of feature that let you just play the music while casually exploring a cave or something, where it's generally pretty quiet. But the main soundtrack perfectly captivated the alluring mystery and melancholy of the pursuit for Zelda. The character themes highlight their distinct personalities, from Tulin's young sense of eagerness and adventure to Riju's Egyptian elements and lightning-fast piano trills. And the boss themes, particularly the Wind Temple boss that has some of the most epic music I have ever heard in a video game, or the fight against Ganondorf with each of his phases feeling like the most intense and terrifying moments in the franchise. Every element of the soundtrack is remarkable, and I found myself on numerous occasions just playing it back in the background while I was writing scripts for videos. It's not only music that perfectly attunes you to the characters and the moments within the game, but quite possibly some of the most emotive and provocative music to listen to outside of your Hyrule adventures. Then you move on to the sound design in the game itself, and the extent of every single tiny audio cue and change. It's also incredibly immersive, but you'd never notice half of it. Listen to this change between the sound of your paraglider flying normally, and then when you're flying in the rain, you can hear the taps on the paraglider. The way that Link's shoes sound differently when running, whether it's wet or you're wearing heavier outfits. Or even the various tunes that Link will hum while he's cooking a meal. If Tears of the Kingdom doesn't win Best Music and Sound Design Awards at numerous events, I will be incredibly surprised. Of course, exploration in Tears of the Kingdom is a huge topic. We touched on this earlier, but literally every area in the game has something new and incredible to experience. While the world itself isn't jam-packed with interesting and unique characters, the way that Red Dead Redemption 2 is, the world itself feels more alive. I can't begin to tell you how much I hated this game for constantly distracting me, particularly in my earlier hours. I'd give myself an hour to play the game, going from one point to another, or giving myself an objective to complete like a certain quest, only to find myself 3 hours later having been distracted by a chap holding a sign, or a cork that needed saving, or a random cave just off the road, or a treasure guarded by enemies that looked irresistible. The fact that I got 400 hours into the game before even completing the main story quests, which in total probably only make up for 15 to 20 hours of content, should speak volumes on the game's ability to entertain and bewitch you with distractions and lucrative opportunities from start to finish. Touching on the depths and the Sky Islands, I want to say that I have mixed feelings about these, because the depths were incredibly fun to explore with an endless amount of loot, some of which actually links back to previous games, and that's really cool to see the nostalgia factor there. A drawback of the depths is of course the fact that you have to spend hours lighting it all up, doing the light routes to actually be able to see where you're going, and it's not a bad thing by any means. It's incredibly challenging and time consuming, which I feel like Zelda needed that. The Sky Islands, on the other hand, though, felt like a little bit of an underwhelming addition. In part, I think it's because of how vast and beautiful the tutorial section was. And then you realize that every other island except for that is so much smaller, and it's kind of copy and pasted to just fill the space in the sky. I definitely would have appreciated more variety, some unique wildlife and monsters, Easter eggs, villages in the sky. But considering how many changes we had to the overworld and the addition of the depths, and an entire sky to explore at the end of the day, I felt like they did an incredible job, with plenty of room for improvement in another sequel or a DLC. Dungeons are, of course, back in a certain fashion, keeping a good balance between Breath of the Wild's annoying divine beasts and Zelda's traditional room-to-room explorers. I will say that the Fire Temple is absolute hell on earth, and I loved it. On my first playthrough I was streaming for like 2 hours and ended up skipping the majority of it using Zonai devices, but on my second playthrough I forced myself to do it legitimately, spending nearly 4 hours getting it done. The bosses, on the other hand, I found to be particularly easy in Tears of the Kingdom, and I don't know if that's because I was using crazy gear due to the amount of time I was putting in, recording videos and stuff, but once again on my second playthrough I went and did it without all of that crazy gear, and it was a lot more fun. But a New Game Plus mode would not go amiss. But on the topic of boss fights, oh my god, that last boss fight against Ganondorf was remarkable. Hands down one of the best boss fights I have ever had in a Zelda game. Also, shout out to everybody who was there with me live in stream. It was a great experience. If you haven't got to that point, you are in for a massive treat. As a little side note, I feel like I should also mention the caves and villages throughout the game, because while the villages haven't changed drastically since Breath of the Wild, they do still feel incredibly alive, more so than ever. And with most of the NPCs having their own routines and whatnot, it's really cool. But the random little caves scattered throughout the world amaze me. Like, not only do we have the depths and the Sky Island and the overworld changes, but we also seem to have hundreds of new mini dungeons scattered throughout the world to get lost in for 10, 20, 30 minutes at a time with no loading screens or transitions whatsoever. There are quests dedicated to exploring these caves. It's remarkable how much the developers have packed into this game and how well it all performs with each other. Story progression, as stated earlier, when done in the right order, is incredible. Good weapons take time to develop, Zonai devices require tools and accessories that take time to collect, and armor requires entire storylines and side quests to be complete in order to upgrade and to find. So I feel like there is a terrific balance when going from a new player to an expert swordsman. It takes a lot to be able to slash your way through any boss in the game. The fact that you can also venture into the depths and take on any of the bosses in a reincarnated form after your initial fight and still be rewarded with unique items and powerful fuse combinations and stuff like that is just incredible. The longevity of Tears of the Kingdom, though, I feel like is determined by your eagerness to complete the main story. For me, I spent so much time exploring the world and seeing all that the game had to offer, completing 10 or 20 side quests for every one main mission. It felt like it was gonna last forever. But of course, everything has its limits, and as a content creator, for me personally, I need to move on from Tears of the Kingdom due to having completed and shared most of the best things that the game has to offer. But that's not to say that I'm done with the game. As I've already said, I'm on my second playthrough, doing things very differently to my first experience, and I'm still loving every single second. But if we're being honest here, there isn't much post-game content besides what is already available to you in the game. So if you're looking for an experience like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Pokemon or Borderlands, where you have entire quests to do afterwards, you're going to be a tad disappointed. And that's why I encourage you to take your time. Don't rush the story. Slowly experience everything you can over time and appreciate all that the game has to offer. I would naturally love to see a New Game Plus with some DLC content while we wait for the next chapter in Link's saga, but for now, I'm perfectly content with everything I've experienced throughout my time with Tears of the Kingdom, and I'll be more than happy replaying this game again and again while we patiently wait for the future of this series. So, as a whole, I genuinely believe that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is hands down one of the best video games ever made. From the elements of nostalgia that intertwine with beautiful modern game development, storytelling that exceeds all expectations, while also remaining true to its roots, and mechanics that will live on and undoubtedly be adapted into many other franchises, I can comfortably say that Zelda has, yet again, reinvigorated gaming and delivered fans an absolute masterpiece that will be replayed for decades to come. In all of the areas where Tears of the Kingdom does fall flat, it does so with grace, an acceptance of imperfection, taking into account how much has been compressed into a single adventure. While I would have, of course, appreciated the ability to play this game with more modern graphics at higher resolutions and higher frame rates than the Nintendo Switch provides, the console itself and the limitations that come along with it have never once retracted from the experience of the game. It unironically made me feel how I felt when playing the older classic Zelda games. The graphics were never the focal point, nor were they ever ultra-realistic in the way that games like Cyberpunk and God of War and The Last of Us tried to emulate that feeling of realism. But the story I experienced and the mechanics and the genius puzzles I spent hours solving gave me far more joy than those extra pixels or shadows or textures ever could. For those 400 hours, I was a kid again. I was experiencing a whole new and yet familiar world with these characters I loved, a kingdom I cherished, and an adventure that I will never forget. So for those reasons, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is a 10 out of 10 for me. It is perfect in almost every single sense, and where there are some minor gripes, there's nothing that has interfered with how much I have fallen in love with this game and this franchise all over again. So, as I bid adieu to Zelda and Link for now, waving goodbye to Tears of the Kingdom until the day that I eagerly make another video on future content or perhaps even a sequel, I want to thank each and every one of you for being part of this journey with me. The last 4 months sharing content on this game have been incredible, and I can't wait for the adventures in the future. Catch you in the next one.